Hello, my name is Richard. I'm the pastor of the King's Church in Addlestone in Surrey. And you've got another bonus episode today on the Sermon on the Mount. I'm talking about fasting again. I talked about fasting a few weeks ago. I'm carrying on talking about fasting today. The reason being because Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, when you fast, and then he goes on to give some teaching, but he doesn't say maybe you should try fasting, or for some people you might be fasting, so here's a few suggestions. He just assumes that everybody is fasting, so he says when you fast, this is how you should do it. So last time I talked about fasting as a spiritual struggle, which we see modelled in Jesus in his 40 days and 40 nights fast and struggle with the devil in Matthew chapter 4, I think. Or chapter 3, Matthew 4, I think. And so when we fast, we are following in Jesus' example, and we are engaging with the struggle that lies within us, the evil that is inside us, and our struggle with that. And remember Evagrius, the church father from the 4th century, who said, fasting is a means of killing the desires and the passions of the body. So this time though, we're going to look at fasting, and we're going to see fasting and its connection with justice. If you know the Bible and how it's divided up for us, you'll know that there are some great chapters, some go-to chapters for certain things. So if you want to know about Jesus' teaching on the lost and the found, then go to Luke 15. That is your go-to chapter. If you want to know about Jesus, the suffering servant, Isaiah 53. Without doubt, go there and read Isaiah 53. If you want to know about resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15. Great chapter on resurrection. Probably the chapter on resurrection. But if you want to know about fasting, I'd have to say that Isaiah 58 is your go-to chapter. Go to Isaiah 58. And we're going to read a large part of that now. Shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they are a nation that does what is right, and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions, and seem eager for God to come near to them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please, and you exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarrelling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed, and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fast I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of your Lord will be your rearguard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and will strengthen your frame. You'll be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. Now, I wonder whether Jesus had this chapter in the back of his mind as he was teaching on fasting in the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, I wonder whether Jesus had this chapter from Isaiah in the back of his mind for a lot of what he's saying in the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, not just what he was talking about in fasting. And we're going to look at some of those connections between Isaiah 58 and the Sermon on the Mount today. But before we do that, I just want to tell you about my first reading of Isaiah 58. I can remember when I was a young man in my previous church, they talked about fasting a little bit, and again, it's just assumed we know what to do when fasting. So I went into the scriptures and found Isaiah 58, started reading it, and if I'm honest, just didn't understand it. It didn't really make much sense to me. What has fasting got to do with me helping the poor, the oppressed? I mean, those two things are good things, but I couldn't quite make the connection between me not eating and me going to help those in need. They're two good things, but they seem quite disconnected to me. But now as I read it again, I think actually verse 10 in Isaiah 58 sums it up well, which speaks and says that we fast, and in fasting we spend ourselves, we pour ourselves out for those who are hungry. So it seems like true fasting is for us to give ourselves on behalf of those who are always hungry. I'll say that again. True fasting is us giving ourselves on behalf of those who are always hungry. In fasting, we associate in body as well as in mind and in spirit with those in need. So fasting is not just us abstaining from food. It's deeper than that. It's acting as well in justice in our world, to bring justice in our world, to provide for the poor. So let's look at some of these connections between Isaiah 58 and the Sermon on the Mount, and particularly Jesus' teaching on fasting. You remember in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was very critical and condemns anyone who fasts for an outward show. He calls those kind of people hypocrites or play actors. You know, the kind of people that made themselves look really sort of terrible. Oh, I'm fasting. Oh, look at me, how holy I am. And Jesus says, look, not interested in that. And again, in Isaiah 58, same kind of thing. Isaiah, he condemns this superficial fasting, this outward fasting to gain God's attention. Look at me, I'm fasting, aren't I amazing? And at the same time, these people were fasting and making a big show of it, and at the same time they were oppressing the poor and just not doing righteousness. So Isaiah is saying, you can't be doing all this religious stuff and trying to make yourself good by doing these religious acts, and at the same time not addressing the needs of the people around you, neglecting the poor, neglecting issues of justice. Those two things have to go hand in hand. You can't separate them out. You can't just sort of think, I'm going to do my fasting and that will make me okay. So Isaiah says in no uncertain terms, that type of fasting that doesn't include acts of justice will not make your voice heard before God. Instead, Isaiah says this in verses 7 and 8. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food or your bread with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood. So much of the Sermon on the Mount really is echoed in just those two verses in Isaiah 58. You remember Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, as he's teaching the Beatitudes, he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice. They will be filled." See, true fasting is not just a hunger for us to get back to eating food again, but it's actually a hunger deep inside us to see justice, to see righteousness worked in the world around us. And the blessing comes when we are satisfied in God, when we see those things and we start to act in those things. That is true fasting. True fasting includes sharing our bread with the hungry. I think the idea is that the food that we don't eat ourselves when we fast, we, rather than store it up for when we finish fasting, we actually give it away and share with others. And if you think about that, doing that gives us an association with those who are hungry, the ones who are always hungry. And that will change us in the way we think and the way we live. And surely it will make a difference to the way we pray, because Jesus taught us, didn't he, in the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. And if we are more aware of the hour and the needs of the hour in that prayer, that will make that prayer a lot more earnest and a lot more sincere. It will certainly change us in that way. True fasting includes sharing food with the hungry. It says, providing shelter for the homeless and clothing the naked. That to me sounds very much like the parable of the Good Samaritan, that Jesus taught, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And again in the Sermon on the Mount, remember Jesus says, love your neighbour, but also love your enemy. True fasting includes a practical way of doing that. True fasting in Isaiah 58 verse 9 says, to take away the pointing finger and the speaking of wickedness. Again in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, don't judge and don't speak in anger. This is all part of the fasting that God endorses, on taking away a pointing finger. I was reading a book called Spiritual Classics. It's a collection of writings on spiritual disciplines, and there's, I think, 3 or 4 chapters written by different people on fasting. And the first chapter, I was reading all of them, but the first chapter, the lady actually felt led to fast from criticism for one day. So she was going to not speak the critical thoughts that came in her. She was not going to speak them out. That was going to be her fast. She treated it a bit like an experiment, she says. And then halfway through the day, she starts to get really bemused that her usual barbed comments that she made were not missed. And that everything that she had an opinion on and everything she had an opinion about, all those different things seemed to just sort of carry on absolutely fine without her critical input. In fact, on reflection at the end of the day, she thought and realised that her critical attitude and her comments that she had in the past had not changed or rectified a single situation or a single person that she'd ever found fault with. But instead she found that her critical spirit had blocked her positive and creative thoughts. So she did this kind of fasting of criticalness as a part of her act of justice, and actually in a way, if you think about it, actually found that there was a connection there in fasting and that spiritual struggle within us. But that was from last time. Anyway, back to this. What does it say? In verse 6 it says, is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? And in verse 8 it says, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of your Lord will be your rear guard. See, true fasting in doing justice will be light to the world around us. And remember what Jesus says again in the Sermon on the Mount. We are called to be light in the world. Light to the world. Being light is more than just saying, here we are, we're a church, therefore we are light. It's more than building a building and saying, come and become part of this community because there is light here. It's more than putting up a sign and saying, you're welcome here, this is church and this is where light happens. It's more than just sitting in the congregation and listening and nodding to the words of Jesus and saying, yes, I agree with that. It's actually to act justly. To act justly in our community. That's what brings light into the world around us. And as we do that, as we fast and we act in these just and righteous ways, God hears prayers from that place. This is the kind of fasting that brings God's renewal, his restoration in his church. Just towards the end of that section in Isaiah 58, it says, you will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of the broken walls and restorer of streets with dwellings. It's an amazing promise. But that's what God says if you fast and act justly. That's what happens. So I challenge you to read through Isaiah 50 this week and maybe pray through it. Read it and pray through it. Let it challenge your fasting. Let it change us so that we might act in justice. And as we pray through it and read through Isaiah 58, then let us find a way of sharing bread with those who are hungry, with those who are always hungry. Don't be overwhelmed by the need around us. There is great need around us, yes, but don't be paralyzed by not being able to solve all the problems. No, we can't each of us solve all the problems, but we can make a difference to one or two people around us maybe. So maybe just engage with the people and the issues around you. And if you're struggling to find a way of doing that, put yourself in a position to engage with the world around you. You might want to volunteer at a food bank or join in with the cat volunteers, or just stop and buy somebody who's asking for food on the street. Just stop and buy them a sandwich and just find out about them, chat to them. Let's do this so that we can grow in our prayer that says, give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Grace and peace. Amen. Don't forget, if you found this video helpful, give it a like. Drop me a comment. If you're thinking about fasting, maybe you've got questions, I'd love to hear them. If you have started fasting or maybe grown in your fasting, I'd love to hear what you're discovering, what you're finding out about yourself. Let me know.